frozen hollow. I thought the worst part of this trip would be the cold. My friends, Mia and Tyler, had begged me to join them for a winter hike in the Cascades, some off-the-grid spot called Hollow Ridge, where the snow was pristine and the views were worth the trek. I'm no outdoorsman, but their excitement wore me down. "One night in a tent," Mia promised, her eyes bright. "It'll be magical." I packed my thermals and went along, ignoring the knot in my stomach. The trail was brutal. Snow crunched under our boots, the wind slicing through our layers. By late afternoon, we reached a clearing, a shallow basin ringed by cliffs, the ground glittering with ice. Tyler grinned, planting the tent stakes. "Told you it'd be epic." I nodded, but something felt off. The air was too still, the cliffs too steep, like a bowl trapping us in. I kept that to myself. Night fell fast. We huddled in the tent, passing a thermos of coffee, the lantern casting jittery shadows. That's when I heard it, a low hum vibrating through the ground. "You guys feel that?" I asked, sitting up. Mia frowned, tilting her head. Tyler laughed. "It's just the wind, dude. Relax." But it wasn't wind. It was steady, rhythmic, like a pulse. I zipped open the tent flap and peered out. The snow glowed faintly under the moon, unbroken except for our tracks. The hum grew louder, burrowing into my skull. I barely slept. Dreams of falling through ice haunted me, and I woke to Mia shaking my shoulder. "Something's out there," she whispered, her face pale. Tyler was already up, clutching a flashlight. We listened. A crunching sound circled the tent, slow, deliberate, like footsteps in the snow. I grabbed my knife, useless as it felt, and we stepped outside. The clearing was empty. Our tracks from the day were gone, smoothed over as if we'd never arrived. But new marks scarred the snow, long, jagged lines, like something had been dragged. They trailed toward the cliffs, vanishing into a crevice we hadn't noticed before. "We should check it out," Tyler said, his voice tight. Mia nodded, but I wanted to pack up and leave. The hum was deafening now, rattling my teeth. They outvoted me. The crevice was narrow, barely wide enough to squeeze through. Inside, it opened into a cave, its walls slick with ice, reflecting our flashlight beams. The air stank of wet stone and something metallic. The hum pulsed here, a living thing. At the far end, a tunnel sloped downward, the drag marks leading into the dark. "This is a bad idea," I said, my breath fogging. Mia ignored me, stepping forward. Tyler followed. I cursed and went after them. The tunnel twisted, the ice growing thicker, sharper, like teeth lining the walls. We found her first. Mia, sprawled on the ground, her flashlight spinning beside her. She was alive, gasping, clawing at her leg. Something had gouged it, deep and ragged. "It grabbed me," she sobbed. "It's down there." Before I could ask what, Tyler screamed, a raw animal sound. I spun. He was gone, the tunnel behind us empty. The hum became a roar. I hauled Mia up, her blood soaking my gloves, and we stumbled back the way we'd come. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, long, spindly shapes skittering across the ice. "Tyler!" I shouted, but only the hum answered. The cave mouth loomed ahead, a sliver of moonlight. We burst out, collapsing in the snow, Mia whimpering beside me. The tent was shredded when we reached it, our gear scattered. No sign of Tyler. The drag marks were everywhere now, crisscrossing the clearing, circling us. I dragged Mia toward the cliffs, searching for a way out, but the snow shifted underfoot, soft and treacherous. That's when I saw it. A hand, pale and stiff, jutting from the ground. Tyler's ring glinted on the finger. I dug, frantic, but the snow kept collapsing, burying him deeper. Mia screamed, pointing. More hands broke the surface, dozens, clawing upward, their nails black and cracked. We ran, the hum chasing us, the ground trembling. The hands grabbed at my boots, cold fingers brushing my ankles. I lost Mia in the chaos, her cries cut off, swallowed by the storm that rolled in behind us. I don't know how I reached the trailhead, how I flagged down a ranger half dead and raving. They found no tent, no tracks, no bodies. Just me, frostbitten and alone. It's been weeks. I'm safe now, they say, but the hum never left. It's in my head, my bones, waking me at night. Last week, I found snow on my floor, wet and fresh, though the windows were locked. Yesterday, a drag mark stretched across my carpet. Tonight, I hear them, soft, insistent, under the hum. You're next. The cold's coming for me. I can feel it. The Whispering Pines. I never should have agreed to this trip. The plan was simple. A week in a remote cabin, just me and my brother, Jake, to reconnect after years of drifting apart. He'd found the place on some sketchy forum, a hidden gem in the Adirondacks, surrounded by pine trees and buried in snow. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just us and the wilderness. I hated the cold, but Jake's enthusiasm was infectious. It'll be like old times, he said, grinning. Caved. The drive up was a nightmare. Snow clogged the roads, and the pines loomed like sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. By the time we reached the cabin, dusk had settled, painting everything in shades of gray. The place was a squat, ugly thing, its wood stained dark, its windows smeared with grime. Inside, it smelled of mildew and pine sap, the kind of damp rot that clings to your lungs. Jake didn't care. He dumped his gear and started a fire in the chipped stone hearth. Humming like this was paradise. I forced a smile, but the silence outside pressed against the walls, thick and unnatural. That night, I woke to whispering. It was faint, threading through the wind, a chorus of voices too soft to understand. I sat up on the lumpy mattress, straining to listen. Jake snored across the room, oblivious. The fire had died to embers, casting a dull glow. The whispers seemed to come from the trees, slithering through the cracks in the cabin's frame. I told myself it was exhaustion, the storm playing tricks. But when I glanced out the window, the pines looked closer than they had before, their shadows stretching toward the glass. Morning came, gray and heavy. The snow had piled up, sealing us in. Jake shrugged it off, cracking jokes about being snowed in with the best company. I tried to laugh, but the whispers lingered in my head. We spent the day playing cards, sipping whiskey, pretending everything was fine. Then I saw the tracks. They were outside the window, a single set of footprints circling the cabin, pressed deep into the snow. Bare feet, no boots, no tread. I pointed them out to Jake, my voice tight. He frowned, grabbing his coat. Probably some hiker, he said, but his eyes darted to the trees. We followed the tracks, the wind biting at our faces. They looped the cabin 3 times before veering into the forest. We stopped at the edge, the pines swallowing the trail. Let's head back, I said, shivering. Jake nodded, but he kept glancing over his shoulder. That night, the whispering grew louder. Words took shape. Come out, hissed in a dozen overlapping voices. I shook Jake awake, my hands trembling. You hear that? He listened, brow furrowed, then shook his head. Just the wind, man. Go back to sleep. But I saw the lie in his eyes. He heard it too. By the 3rd day, the cabin felt like a cage. The snow kept falling, the tracks reappeared. Closer now, brushing the walls, and the whispers turned to pleas. We're lonely. Join us. Jake started acting strange, staring out the windows for hours, muttering about shapes in the trees. I caught him carving something into the table, a jagged spiral, his knife digging deep. What the hell, Jake? I snapped. He blinked, like waking from a dream, and dropped the knife. I don't know, he whispered. It told me to. That night, he was gone. I woke to an empty bed, the front door ajar, snow drifting inside. Jake! I screamed, pulling on my boots. His coat was still there, his boots untouched. I stumbled outside, flashlight shaking in my hand. The tracks were back, bare feet, leading straight into the pines. The whispers roared now, a cacophony of he's ours, he's ours. I followed, heart hammering, the beam cutting through the dark. The trees closed in, branches snagging my jacket. The tracks ended at a clearing, a perfect circle of untouched snow. In the center stood Jake, barefoot, shirtless, his skin blue with cold. His eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on something I couldn't see. "Jake!" I shouted, lunging forward. He turned and I froze. His face was wrong, slack, empty like a mask. He smiled, too wide, and whispered, "They're beautiful." The ground shuddered. Shadows rose from the snow, tall, skeletal figures woven from pine needles and ice, their eyes glowing like embers. The whispers became a scream, filling my skull. I ran, tripping over roots, the flashlight tumbling from my grip. The cabin loomed ahead, a faint promise of safety. I slammed the door, barricading it with the table, the chairs, anything I could drag. They came anyway, scratching at the walls, tapping the windows, their voices seeping through. "You can't hide. You're ours too." The fire wouldn't light. The cold sank into my bones, and Jake's voice joined the chorus, soft, pleading. "Come out, brother. It's warm here." I'm writing this now, huddled in the corner, the last of my phone's battery draining. The walls are splintering, the windows cracking. The pines are inside, their branches curling through the gaps, reaching for me. I see them now, those things, grinning with needle teeth, their arms open wide. Jake's with them, his eyes glowing, his hand outstretched. The whispering stopped. The silence is worse. They're waiting. I don't know how much longer I can. The cabin beneath the frost. I should have known something was off the moment we arrived. The snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, blanketing the forest in a silence so deep it felt like the world was holding its breath. My girlfriend, Clara, had found the cabin online, a cozy winter retreat nestled in the Rockies, cheap enough to tempt us for a weekend escape from the city. The pictures showed a quaint log cabin with a stone chimney, glowing warmly against a snowy backdrop. Perfect, we thought. A chance to unplug, sip hot cocoa, and watch the storm from behind frosted windows. The drive up was hell. The GPS cut out 10 miles from the turnoff, and the road, more a winding path of packed ice, nearly sent our beat-up sedan into a ditch. By the time we spotted the cabin, night had swallowed the mountains, and the wind howled like a living thing. It didn't look like the photos. The logs were weathered, almost black, and the windows stared out like hollow eyes. But we were tired, frozen, and out of options. "It's fine," Clara said, forcing a smile. "Rustic charm, right?" Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of damp wood and something sour I couldn't place. The furniture was sparse. A sagging couch, a rickety table, a wood stove that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows. Clara dumped her bag and started unpacking, humming to herself, but I couldn't shake the unease curling in my gut. The walls felt too close, the silence too thick. That first night, I woke to a sound, a low, rhythmic thump, like footsteps pacing outside. I sat up, breath fogging in the dim moonlight spilling through the window. Clara slept soundly beside me, her chest rising and falling. The thumping stopped as I held my breath, straining to hear. Probably just ice cracking, I told myself. Old cabins creak in the cold. I lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. My eyes kept drifting to the window, expecting to see a shape against the glass. Morning brought no relief. The snow had piled higher overnight, burying the car up to its hood. We weren't leaving anytime soon. Clara laughed it off, saying it was an adventure, but I saw the flicker of worry in her eyes. We busied ourselves exploring the cabin, hoping to shake the gloom. That's when I found the trapdoor. It was under a threadbare rug in the corner, a square of wood with a rusted iron ring. Clara crouched beside me as I tugged it open, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was frigid, tinged with that same sour stench, sharper now. "A cellar?" she asked, peering down. "Maybe there's wine or something." I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and went first, the ladder creaking under my weight. The beam cut through the black, illuminating a small, dirt-floored room. Shelves lined the walls, but they were empty save for a few rusted cans and a cracked jar of what might have been pickles. In the center sat a wooden chair, its back splintered, stained with dark streaks that looked too much like blood. My stomach twisted. "This is creepy as hell," I called up. "Let's go back." Clara didn't answer. I swung the light up to the trapdoor. She wasn't there. "Clara?" My voice echoed faintly, swallowed by the damp walls. I scrambled up the ladder, heart pounding. The cabin was empty. Her coat still hung by the door. Her boots still sat by the stove. Panic clawed at me. "Clara!" I shouted, stepping outside into the blizzard. The wind screamed back, flinging snow into my face. No footprints, no sign of her. I searched for hours, yelling her name until my throat burned. The storm grew worse, forcing me back inside. She had to be here, I told myself. She wouldn't just vanish. That's when I heard it again, the thumping, louder now, coming from below. My blood ran cold. The trapdoor was still open, a black maw in the floor. I grabbed the flashlight and descended again, each step heavier than the last. The cellar looked the same, but the chair was gone. In its place was a hole, jagged and uneven, like something had clawed its way out of the frozen earth. The thumping pulsed from within, steady as a heartbeat. I edged closer, shining the light down. The tunnel sloped sharply, too narrow to stand in, its walls glistening with ice. And then I saw it. A scrap of Clara's red scarf, caught on a root, fluttering faintly. I don't know why I crawled in. Fear had numbed me, but the need to find her overpowered everything else. The tunnel was tight, the cold biting into my skin as I inched along. The thumping grew louder, vibrating through the walls. My flashlight flickered, then steadied, revealing a wider chamber ahead. I squeezed through and stood, chest heaving. The room was a cave, its ceiling dripping with icicles like teeth. In the center, Clara knelt, her back to me, motionless. "Clara?" I whispered. She didn't move. The thumping was deafening now, shaking the ground. I stepped closer, reaching for her shoulder, and she turned. Her face wasn't hers. Her eyes were black voids, her mouth stretched wide in a silent scream, skin pale as the snow above. Something moved behind her, a shadow too tall, too thin, unfolding from the dark. Its limbs cracked as it rose, joints bending wrong, its head a tangle of antlers and frost. The thumping stopped. The silence was worse. I ran, scrambling back through the tunnel, my screams echoing off the ice. I don't know how I made it to the ladder, how I slammed the trapdoor shut and dragged the table over it. The cabin trembled as something pounded from below, relentless, splintering the wood. I barricaded the door with the couch, the stove, anything I could move, sobbing as the floor buckled. The storm raged all night, masking the sounds, or maybe amplifying them. By dawn, the pounding stopped. The snow had buried the cabin up to its roof, trapping me inside. I waited, shivering, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. Hours passed, then days. The food ran out. The cold seeped deeper. Yesterday, I heard it again. Not thumping, scratching. Slow, deliberate, from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. It's not Clara down there. It's not human. And it's not leaving. The flashlight's dying now, flickering as I write this on the last page of my notebook. If anyone finds this, don't open the trapdoor. Don't look for me. The snow won't let you leave, and neither will it. The Winter Hollow. I should have known something was wrong when the snow started falling harder than the forecast predicted. My breath fogged in the dim glow of the cabin's porch light as I hauled the last bag from the trunk. The rental was supposed to be a quiet escape. Me, a week of solitude, and the endless white of the Vermont mountains. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just me and the woods. That's what the listing promised. But as I stood there, the wind howling through the pines like a scream caught in a throat, I felt it. A prickle on my neck, like someone was watching. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and faintly of something sour I couldn't place. The furniture was old, sagging under decades of neglect, and the walls were lined with faded photos of stern-faced people in black and white. I dropped my bags by the fireplace and got to work building a fire. The logs were damp, but after some cursing and a lot of kindling, flames finally licked up. I sat back, letting the warmth chase the chill from my bones. That's when I heard it. A faint thump from upstairs. I froze. The listing said 1 floor. No basement, no attic, just a simple cabin. I grabbed the poker from the hearth, its cold iron heavy in my hand, and climbed the narrow stairs I'd assumed led to a loft. At the top, a door waited, unpainted, warped, like it had been tacked on as an afterthought. I hadn't noticed it when I'd walked through earlier. My heart thudded as I turned the knob. Locked. The thump came again, louder, from the other side. "Hello!" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the storm outside. No answer, just the wind. I told myself it was a branch hitting the roof, or maybe the pipes settling. I went back downstairs, but the unease stuck with me, a splinter under my skin. By midnight, the storm was a full-on blizzard. Snow piled against the windows, turning them opaque, and the power flickered before dying completely. The fire was my only light now, casting long shadows that danced like figures on the walls. I tried to sleep on the lumpy couch, but every creak of the cabin kept me awake. Then, the thumping started again, rhythmic, insistent, like footsteps pacing above me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Poker in hand, I climbed the stairs again. The door was still locked, but this time, I pressed my ear to it. A low hum vibrated through the wood. Not the wind, not the storm, but something alive. My stomach twisted. I banged on the door, shouting, "Who's there?" The humming stopped. Silence stretched out, thick and heavy, until a single sharp knock answered from the other side. I stumbled back, nearly falling down the stairs. My mind raced. There was no way anyone could be up there. The cabin was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by snowdrifts too deep to cross. I checked the front door, locked. Windows, sealed. I was alone, or I was supposed to be. The fire was dying when I got back downstairs. I threw on the last logs, my hands shaking. That's when I saw it. A shadow moving across the room, too tall, too thin to be mine. It stretched along the wall, then vanished as the flames flared up. I spun around, poker raised, but the room was empty. My breath came in ragged gasps. "This isn't happening," I whispered, trying to convince myself. Then the scratching started. It came from the ceiling, right above where the locked door would be. Slow, deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. I stared up, clutching the poker so tight my knuckles ached. The scratches moved, trailing toward the stairs, then down the wall behind me. I whipped around, but there was nothing, just the peeling wallpaper and those damn photos staring at me. One of the frames caught my eye. It was crooked now, though I hadn't touched it. I stepped closer, squinting in the firelight. The family in the photo, 3 of them, unsmiling, looked different. Their eyes were blacked out, scratched into voids. My stomach dropped. I hadn't noticed that before. I checked another photo. Same thing, blank, hollow eyes. Every picture on the wall had been altered, and I hadn't heard a sound while I'd been upstairs. The scratching stopped. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then the floorboards groaned behind me. I turned slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. A figure stood in the corner, just beyond the fire's glow. Tall, thin, its head tilted at an impossible angle. It didn't move, didn't breathe, but I felt its stare boring into me. I blinked, and it was gone. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, waiting for it to come back. The storm raged on, the wind screaming like a chorus of the damned. I couldn't stay still anymore. I had to know what was behind that door. I grabbed a kitchen knife, better than nothing, and marched upstairs. The door loomed ahead, its edges seeming to pulse in the dark. I rammed the poker into the frame, prying until the lock splintered free. The door swung open, and a wave of cold hit me, colder than the storm outside. The room beyond was small, windowless, its walls covered in scratches. Deep, frantic gouges that overlapped like someone had clawed at them for hours. In the center sat a chair, rotted and splintered, with a single rope coiled around it, stained dark. The air smelled wrong, like decay and something metallic. And then I saw the footprints in the dust, bare, human, leading from the chair to the door. They stopped right where I stood. I backed out, my mind screaming to run, but the cabin was a trap. The snow was too deep, the car buried. I slammed the door shut and wedged the poker through the knob, praying it'd hold. Downstairs, the fire was nearly out. I piled on anything that'd burn, books, a chair cushion, anything to keep the dark at bay. That's when the whispering started. It came from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, soft, overlapping voices I couldn't understand. They grew louder, angrier, until they were shouting in a language I didn't know. I pressed my hands to my ears, yelling at them to stop, but they drilled into my skull. And then silence. Dead, suffocating silence. I didn't see it move. 1 second, the room was empty. The next, it was there, right in front of me. Its face was a blur, like a photo smeared with wet ink, but its eyes were black pits, endless and hungry. It reached out, fingers long and bony, and I swung the knife. The blade passed through it like smoke, and it laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I ran for the door, tearing it open. The blizzard swallowed me, snow stinging my face, but I didn't care. I'd rather freeze than stay with that thing. I stumbled through the drifts, the cold clawing at my lungs, until I saw lights, headlights, cutting through the white. A truck. I waved my arms, screaming, and it stopped. The driver, an old man with a grizzled beard, yanked me inside without a word. "You're lucky I found you," he said, his voice rough. "Nobody's lived in that cabin for years. Not since the family went missing." I stared at him, shivering, my teeth chattering too hard to speak. He didn't ask what I'd seen. Maybe he knew. As we drove away, I looked back. The cabin was a shadow in the storm, but I swear I saw it, the figure, standing in the window watching me go. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know. But every night since, when the wind howls, I hear the whispers again. And last week, I found scratches on my bedroom wall.